Welcome back. Another day, another lecture, and today the fit even matches the slides. We've come to lecture 10 out of 13, which means that we are getting really close to the season finale, also known as the exam. So this lecture and the two next are going to be about consecutively larger structures in the universe. We're going to start this one out with looking at galaxy groups, including the local group of the Milky Way and galaxy mergers and interactions. In the next two lectures, we are going to start by looking at galaxy clusters before moving on to looking at the large-scale structure of the entire universe. Before finally, in the last lecture, number 13, taking a look at the present-day frontier in the observations of the highest redshift galaxies that exist out there. But first, let's take a look at galaxy groups, and we start by taking a look at our own local group, which we see a map of here. If I try to zoom in a little bit, you can see that the local group is consisting mainly of two main large spiral galaxies, the Milky Way, which we see down here, and the Andromeda galaxy up here. And both of these two spiral galaxies have a number of satellite galaxies around them. We look at the Milky Way, we see that the Milky Way is surrounded by the Large Magellanic Cloud, the Small Magellanic Cloud, plus a number of smaller dwarf irregular satellites. And in a similar way, we can look at Andromeda, and we can see that that one is surrounded by maybe not quite as many dwarf irregulars, but on the other hand, it has a real whopper of a satellite galaxy in M33 here. It also has this really compact but very massive elliptical galaxy M32 here, plus a bunch of other satellite galaxies in its immediate surroundings. So the local group consists of about 50 galaxies, or just over 50 galaxies, and is, as we said, dominated by the two large spirals, the Milky Way and Andromeda, plus the kind of buzzing cloud of satellite galaxies for each of these two. Basically, most other galaxies in the local groups are satellites of either the Milky Way or Andromeda. We have roughly four spirals. There's the Milky Way, there's Andromeda, also known as M31, and then there's M33, the large spiral galaxy of Andromeda. And finally, we have the Large Magellanic Cloud, which is also a disturbed spiral, even though it is not as massive and not as bright as M33. And then we have one elliptical, M32, that we just took a look at, plus a number of dwarf ellipticals, dwarf spheroidals, ultra-compact dwarfs, dwarf irregulars, and globular clusters. We can see all these different classes over in this plot here on the left side, which we have taken a look at before, where we have their luminosity along the x-axis and their size along the y-axis, like their compactness, you can say, along the y-axis. And the Milky Way and Andromeda sit up here and are both large ellipticals. They are very bright. They also have quite large radii. And then we have late type and spheroidals here. We have the ultra faint ones here. The ultra compact dwarfs sit down here and are almost kind of overlapping with the largest globular clusters in the Milky Way. The difference being that globular clusters don't have their own dark matter halo, which ultra-compact dwarf galaxies do. But one thing we can take away from this is that these are all very, very different in terms of their size and their luminosity. The local group is gravitationally bound. It means that it doesn't expand along with the general expansion of the universe. And the local group has a bunch of major observational advantages in the sense that all these galaxies are very close and bright. We can see individual stars in galaxies in the local group, and we can measure gas and so on in very high detail. That means that we have a relatively broad sample, and definitely a broader sample than just the Milky Way, to study galaxies in high detail. It also allows the study of dark matter on larger scales because we can study the gravitational interactions between the galaxies in the local group. And it is very nice that we have this group of galaxies right at a distance that we can use to calibrate Cepheid variable distance scales, which again later on have been used to calibrate supernova, type 1a supernova distance scales, and so helped us map the size and the expansion rate of the universe as a whole. So there is a lot of advantages to having the local group in our immediate neighborhood. The Andromeda Galaxy is our closest major neighbor, and as we can see here, it is very similar to the Milky Way, although not entirely identical. It is a SB galaxy type. It doesn't seem to have a bar. It is somewhat larger than the Milky Way, but not by a whole lot. It has a scale length of about 6 kiloparsec. It has a similar rotation curve to the Milky Way and is probably about 50% more luminous. We have to remember here that our knowledge of the Milky Way is patchy, is a little bit iffy, because we're back to the whole seeing the forest for all the trees problem that we've talked about before. But to our best current knowledge, Andromeda is somewhat larger and more luminous than the Milky Way, but not by a whole lot. Andromeda has a large bulge compared to the Milky Way, and it has a lower star formation rate. But where it does have star formation, it mainly is concentrated in the so-called ring of fire that we can see, for example, here. We can see around here as well. And it has relatively metal-rich halo stars. Looking at our own satellites, the Magellanic Clouds, we can start by taking a look at the Large Magellanic Cloud. The Large Magellanic Cloud is the spiral galaxies as well. It has a small bar, but it's also quite strongly disturbed by the interactions with the Milky Way and the Small Magellanic Cloud. It is about 50 kiloparsecs away from the Milky Way, or rather away from the solar neighborhood of the Milky Way, and it has a mass of about 2 times 10 to the 10 solar masses. So this also speaks a little bit to how large the Milky Way is, that such a large galaxy can still be a satellite of the Milky Way, which has on the order of magnitude a couple of times 10 to the 11 solar masses. It is a gas-rich barred galaxy with one spiral arm, and it contains 30 Doradus, also known as the Tarantula Nebula, which is one of the largest H2 regions in the local group and one of the most intensely star-forming regions, most intense starburst episodes in the local universe. So again, another example that we are quite privileged to have the galaxies in the local group so close to us. 30 Doradus, or the Tarantula Nebula, is a very important and very valuable laboratory for studying intense star formation, like we see, for example, a lot more commonly in the early universe. The Small Magellanic Cloud is a dwarf irregular galaxy. It is cigar-shaped, more or less. It has a lower metallicity than the Milky Way, and the Large Magellanic Cloud, it is a little bit further away from us than the Large Magellanic Cloud, about 60 kiloparsecs away. And it is also, as you can see, somewhat lower stellar mass, down to around 7 times 10 to the 9 solar masses. So about a third of the mass of the Large Magellanic Cloud. Between them and behind them and in front of them, basically following their orbit around the Milky Way, is what we call the Magellanic Stream, which is a large stream of H1 gas, which is observed in 21 centimeters. You can see the Magellanic Clouds here. We have the Magellanic Bridge running between them, and then we have this trailing arm, this trailing stream of gas, which has basically been pulled behind the Magellanic Clouds, pulled behind the Magellanic Clouds as they are gravitationally interacting with the Milky Way, as they have been diving through the disk of the Milky Way around here some time ago, and now are on their way to dive into the disk of the Milky Way again. There's also this thing here called the leading arm. So there is some of the gases actually running ahead of the main mass of the galaxies on its way to plunge into the Milky Way disk again. The Magellanic Clouds and the Milky Way share a common H1 envelope or envelope. The large Magellanic and small Magellanic Clouds are connected by the Magellanic Bridge, and they have the Magellanic Stream trailing them behind them, both in their orbit, and also have this leading arm in front of them. And as I said, the Magellanic Clouds are likely in a plunging orbit around the Milky Way, with the latest close approach being about 200 to 400 million years ago. If we try to zoom out a little bit, we can take a look at the local group again. The local group, as I mentioned before, is bound. That also goes for all other galaxy groups. They are gravitationally bound. They're decoupled from the Hubble flow, meaning that they are not expanding along with the general expansion of the universe. They are kept together as groups by their gravity, and their gravity keeps their structural integrity intact. Galaxy groups are mostly dwarf galaxies with light output dominated by a few spirals. That is also, in that sense, the local group is also quite typical for galaxy groups. And galaxy groups contain over 50% of galaxies in the nearby universe, with the rest being either in clusters or being single field galaxies that are kind of existing away from and not majorly interacting with other galaxies. There is a lot of H1 surviving around and between galaxies in a typical galaxy group. We have the local group with the Magellanic Stream showing down here from before, and we also remember the group around M81 that we have been taking a look at before, where we can also see these large gas streams connecting the galaxies in that group. On top of that, roughly half of all galaxy groups are visible in X-rays. So just like inside early type galaxies, in the main, you can call it their halos, or the gravity wells of galaxy groups, we have hot X-ray gas, which is confined by the group's gravitational potential and then can be accelerated by magnetic fields or other things, which means that about half of all galaxy groups are visible in X-rays due to very much the same mechanisms that also make early type galaxies shine in X-rays. That was it for the first half of lecture 10. I thank you for staying with me this long, and I will see you in the next one.